There is a big danger in low Earth orbit right now, but it's actually pretty small. What do I mean? On Tuesday, a Chinese Long March 6A rocket launched, and unfortunately, it resulted in over 300 pieces of trackable debris in low Earth orbit. U.S. Space Command shared they've observed no immediate threats and continue to conduct routine conjunction assessments to support the safety and sustainability of the space domain. The Starlink team also issued a statement saying they're closely monitoring the debris created by this mishap of the upper stage of Long March 6A. The good news is the debris does not pose a significant immediate risk to the Starlink constellation, but most is likely to remain in space for decades due to the incident occurring at a high altitude, around 800 kilometers. Starlink goes on to say space safety and sustainability are technical challenges, but they can be managed with transparent communication on asset locations, current and planned, proactive mitigations like deorbiting upper stages after payload dispense, and passive safety measures such as inserting at lower altitudes and raising to an operational orbit. And here's what I want to point out, and the difference maybe between Starlink and Chinese space. It's not a crime to have a mishap, but it's how you respond to that. The Starlink team goes on to say SpaceX recently suffered a launch mishap of our own. However, our strategy to drop off Starlink satellites below 300 kilometers and operating at low altitudes in general helped ensure that any debris released from that event re-entered within days. And by design, Starlink satellites fully demise upon re-entry, posing no threat to public safety. We, acting as a community, should implement best practices to keep space safe and sustainable. But for people like Jared Isaacman, who will be flying up on a SpaceX rocket pretty soon for the Polaris Dawn mission, he writes on X, "Well, this is unfortunate. If we are going to venture out and explore the stars, it would be better if we didn't have a gauntlet of landmines to navigate along the way. It is really the debris that isn't trackable that is scary. Even millimeter-sized objects at 8 kilometers per second can penetrate a spaceship or spacesuit." And he's right. It is scary, and that's why I say it's a big problem that's actually pretty small. Jared, as many of you might know, will be participating in the first ever private commercial spacewalk. So, yeah, this is not a great situation to be worried about. Oddly enough, when the news broke on Thursday, August 8th about this debris field that just continued to grow to about 300 pieces, they initially stated it was 50 pieces. I had already scheduled an interview with a space lawyer, Michelle Hanlon.
My name is Michelle Hanlon. I'm a space lawyer. I am the executive director of the Center for Air and Space Law here at the University of Mississippi, and I'm also the co-founder and president of an organization called For All Moonkind, which is the only organization in the world focused on protecting cultural heritage in outer space.
I learned about Michelle because we both participated in a BBC series called Sideways: A New Frontier. I was interviewed about life down in Boca Chica, Texas, and she was interviewed about her specialty, which is space law.
My passion is about lunar governance, and part of lunar governance, of course, is being able to get to the moon. And so by virtue of the fact that I am so fascinated by the moon and so convinced that humanity needs to access and build communities on the moon in order to survive and gain access to the resources of the universe, we have to make sure that we can get out of our own orbit. And so considering orbital debris as it affects our satellites and as it affects us here terrestrially has become a large part of my research area.
Yeah, we don't want the Kessler syndrome.
So I'd like to tell my students that we are in Kessler. I mean, and I think if you look at NASA research, if we do nothing, if we never launch again, we still have the threat of not being able to access our orbit, because the stuff that's already up there is going to start hitting each other and create more and more debris. And that debris is going to hit each other and create more debris. And pretty soon, at the very least, we're going to have to harden our spacecraft more to withstand the being impacted. I mean, we saw from Space Shuttle the pieces of debris the size of a grain of sand can cause the windshield on Space Shuttle to crack. That's what caused cracks also in the windows in the cupola on station. If you get even just a little bit larger, I think it was a 7 centimeter piece of debris. And remember, it's going faster than a speeding bullet. It's going, 17,000 miles per hour. It can, if there's been an experiment done where they shot it into a piece of, steel beam, and it created a 7-inch divot. So imagine what that's going to do to your very fragile spacecraft, which has all of its solar panels laid out. It's a real problem in terms of cost, because if we have to protect our spacecraft more, it's going to cost more to launch them. And again, if we do nothing, we're still going to create this. We are in the process of creating a debris field that it's going to make it very hard for us to reach beyond our orbit. We've learned a lot. So a lot of what we consider orbital debris now are old satellites, space junk that has been up there that we flew back in the 70s and 80s. And it didn't, we were just, back then it was just like, the universe is ours. Who cares? We're just going to leave it there. And now we're realizing, oh, wait, we need to have end of life plans. We need to pull these things out of orbit. We need to get them out of the way. And so these smaller satellite constellations, yes, there's going to be, I think Starlink is already at 5,000. It plans to go to 14,000. Kuiper is going to have as many. The Chinese constellation also is about 14,000. We have a filing from Rwanda that is asking to reserve space for 120,000. There's going to be a lot of small satellites up there. The good news about the small satellites is they have propulsion. And so what we've seen with respect to Starlink anyway as a model is, they're pretty adept at staying out of each other's way, out of the way of their own satellites, of getting out of the way of other satellites. Now, of course, the Chinese don't entirely agree with that. I don't know if you're aware, back in December 2021, they sent a note, a very formal complaint to the United Nations saying, dear United Nations, we have an obligation under international law to inform you of any situations in space which may potentially cause harm to humans. And we are now raising this. There is a phenomena in space currently that is causing potential harm to humans. And what was that phenomena? And that's the word used in the Outer Space Treaty. That phenomena was Starlink. China said Starlink is in our way of our Tiangong, of our Chinese space station, and therefore, this is something we have to alert the international community to. And of course, they said, and by the way, United States, it's your job to supervise him and Starlink, and you haven't done that. It's going to get very crowded up there. And even though these smaller satellites have these propulsive capabilities, as we've seen from just this week, those satellites don't always work themselves, and they are also, the Chinese recent launch had created a bunch of debris.
So what exactly happened that China created this field of space debris? Well, a launch to deploy the first batch of communications satellites, similar to Starlink, has created a bunch of space debris, and that could threaten spacecraft in low Earth orbit. This launch happened Tuesday, August 6th. U.S. Space Forces confirmed the breakup of the Long March 6A rocket's upper stage, which likely occurred on August 7th. And while this was an unfortunate incident, China is just getting started on its own mega constellation similar to Starlink. They're planning to have 14,000 low Earth orbit communication satellites. Michelle is passionate not just spreading awareness about space debris, but also trying to find a solution. Space debris is part of almost every topic surrounding activities in space, and despite us talking about it a lot, both the threat and damage and lack of progress in mitigating this issue continues to grow.
We've talked about China a little bit, but there are just these shocking videos of, boosters falling from the sky. And how do we get more international cooperation when not everyone's willing to play ball?
China is a really interesting example, and I think a very good counterpoint to demonstrate that we really don't have to run around being worried about being hit by space debris. The Earth is very large. It is primarily water. So for the most part, it is pretty, the odds are that you are going to hit water and not somebody's home. It's a very unusual circumstance. But again, and as you mentioned, just Googling today that there's debris up there, that debris is going to fall into the atmosphere. Is it going to burn up or not? This is not a calculation that the Chinese do. In their sort of risk assessment, at some point they decided we are not going to worry about hitting somebody if it is more financially the financial management of having to pay somebody if we hit them costs more to us than it would be to try and figure out exactly where this is going to fall down. So how do we make international rules? Well, sadly, most international rules are made in retrospect, right? Retroactively. I think when somebody is catastrophically impacted by a piece of debris coming down, that is when the international community is going to sort of take note and say, oh, maybe we ought to have standards about that. And the standards about what can re-enter and what can't re-enter are very technical, and that's great, because what we've seen, especially with respect to space, is that our scientists, Chinese, Russian, American, Indian, tend to agree with each other. And that's tends to be where agreement starts in space. And so if it's going to be up to the scientists to decide how you make the risk assessment of whether something's going to break up or where it's going to go, then I think it's hopeful.
Thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you liked it, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Ellie in Space. And I want to thank Michelle for giving us so much of her time. I actually have 2 other parts of this interview that I will be releasing. I think Michelle is very well spoken and educated on these issues. In my next 2 videos, we'll be talking about the family from Florida who filed a claim against NASA for a piece of space junk, an ISS battery falling into their home. We'll also be talking about what she's most concerned about over the next 5 years. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.